In this Shadow of the Erdtree video, I'm going to be showing you my Magma Spitter build. This is a build that uses the Magma Blade, which is not a DLC weapon. This is a weapon you can find in the base game. I actually have not made a build with this weapon. Shockingly, I think there's probably 1,000 builds all over the internet using this weapon. But I have used a couple new items in conjunction with this weapon to make it more useful, and there are some other things that I think you'll love about this build. So first of all, let's take a look at the Magma Blade. This is a curved sword that deals both physical and fire damage. It has scaling in strength, dexterity, and faith, although I will say the strength scaling is far better than either the dexterity or faith scaling. And the dexterity scaling seems to be even slightly better than the faith, even though the faith has C and dexterity has D in scaling, so that's a little bit misleading. So I've skewed my stats a bit for this weapon in order to maximize the damage, as much damage as possible, and in terms of attack rating, that's why we have a lot more strength in this build. Additionally, by having higher strength, we're able to use a great shield, which I'll go into in just a minute, which allows us to block counter very easily and use a particular weapon, or I should say shield, that works fantastically with this build. But what this weapon's weapon skill does is it's called Magma Shower, and it's very similar in animation-wise to Spinning Slash. It spins around and then spins around again, slashing, and you're hit repeatedly when doing this, but you also drop magma on the ground that deals fire damage over time to enemies standing inside it, and it allows you to stack that magma up. So the more you spin, the more magma drops on the ground, the more damage that the enemy or boss takes from your hits and also from the magma on the ground. So you can get very, very high damage very quickly. And there are a couple reasons that this weapon skill is even deadlier in the DLC than it was previously, and if you've made a build using this before, you might want to consider revisiting it. And the first one is the Talisman of Dread. This talisman increases the damage that you do with magma skills and magma spells, and this is a magma skill, so you get about 10% increased damage from using this talisman, so that the magma on the ground is going to deal even more damage than it did previously, which is just great. And secondly, the oil-soaked tier basically debuffs enemies near you by covering them in oil, making them take more fire damage. Since you basically have to be point blank with this weapon skill, you're going to be constantly coating enemies and bosses in oil, making them take more fire damage. And you can stack this with the Flame Shroud and Crack tier in order to increase your fire damage as well. So you have a very, very deadly flask of physique that is going to further boost your damage, allowing you to just get really, really high damage numbers. And I've seen a lot of people out there who do dual-wield builds using two Magma Curved swords, but here's the thing about it. The weapon skill only uses one of those swords. So you really only need one curved sword of this weapon in order to use that weapon skill reliably. Otherwise, you're going to have to choose between using the dual-wield moveset or using the weapon skill. And if you're doing dual-wield moveset, then you don't really need the weapon skill. If you're using the weapon skill, then you don't really need two of these swords, which is why I only have one here. So when it comes to shields for this, I'm using the One-Eyed Shield. This is a great shield that has strength requirement. We have plenty of strength in this build, so that works out really well. And it has fantastic guard boost. It has pretty good resistances or damage negation against other damage types besides physical. Fire, notably, is pretty high. And what this thing does is it's absolutely fantastic. It has a weapon skill called Flame Spit that sort of readies up like a round of fire that you shoot at an enemy. It has decent range when you're locked on, but you can actually unlock and like arc it up for further range. And it has a little bit of an AoE to it, although it's not significant. But this projectile deals pure fire damage, and it only seems to increase with the upgrade of the shield. So there's no way to like get more damage out of this stat-wise, but you can boost it with like Fire Scorpion Charm or Flame Shroud and Crack tier, which we use. Or if an enemy is covered in oil from the oil-soaked tier, they'll take more damage from this, etc. So this works really well, and what I love about it is it allows us to do block counters very easily because we have good guard boost and it has more hardness than a regular medium shield. But more importantly, it gives you a significant ranged option, and one of the issues with the Magma Blade is that it has very short reach. It's a very short weapon in general. Weapon skill has very short reach. So if you are trying to range an enemy down, then you have really no way to do that. You could use the Clawmark Seal in this build because you do have strength and faith, although we're not completely optimized because we don't have 45 faith and 45 strength, or right around there. We have a lot more strength than faith, but if you took this build higher, you could get better incantation scaling using that seal and use incantations with this build as well, particularly fire ones. But if you're not doing that, such as what we're not doing here, then this really gives you a fantastic ranged option, and it's just so good. This thing is deadly. You can lead off boss fights with it. You can hit hard to hit bosses. Like Putrescent Knight just gets melted by this weapon skill. You can pick off enemies at range. You can really do a lot of different things with this weapon skill that you wouldn't be able to do in a lot of other builds. You can block while you're using it. You know, you can two-hand your weapon and go into Magma Shower and then go back to one-handing, block attacks, block counter, then fire off a round, then, you know, go mix in a Magma Shower. There's a lot of really good combos here. But giving you that ranged option really allows you to have the best of both worlds. You're going to have fantastic up-close melee damage with Magma Shower, and then that ranged shot, which can absolutely wipe out enemies in one hit. I'm also using a Sacred Seal here, and I'm simply just using the Erdtree Seal because it weighs nothing to not add to my equip load. I'm only using it for Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength because we deal physical and fire damage in this build, and getting extra protection and damage from Golden Vow is good. But as I mentioned, you could use the Clawmark Seal and cast incantations, although you'd have to have a few more levels in Faith to really make them viable in the DLC, in my opinion. Armor-wise for this build, I have the Fire Knight Helm and the Fire Knight Armor, and then I've paired that with Scale Gauntlets and Scale Legs to kind of give me the look that I have. This gets me over 51 poise. You get a little bit of benefit from the Fire Knight Helm. That just gives you some stat increases, which is nice. They're just all around generally good ones like stamina, equip load, etc. So that's nice to have. The bonus that the Fire Knight Armor has does not apply to what we're doing here, so that's not really anything. It's more about the fashion with this build, getting over that 51 poise and getting a little bit extra bonus from the helm, but you can really use any armor that you want to use because the idea here is, you know, really just to have the 51 poise and some decent protection. So talisman-wise for this build, we have the Talisman of Dread, which I mentioned earlier, which is great for boss encounters, particularly where you know you're going to be using Magma Shower a lot. If you're out on the landscape, I don't tend to use Magma Shower as much, so you might want to swap that out there for something like Ritual Sword Talisman or Crusade Insignia, something like that. Shard of Alexander boosts both the damage of Magma Shower and Flame Spit, so you want to keep that on at all times. And Fire Scorpion Charm, same thing, increases your fire damage. This is going to increase the damage of Flame Spit and Magma Shower, so you want to keep that on as well. A little bit of negative in terms of your protection, but we have plenty of protection between our armor and Golden Vow as well. And I like Rotten Wing Sword Insignia here for boss fights when you know you're going to use Magma Shower like a lot, and you're going to just spam it back to back. But otherwise, it's not so useful out in the landscape when you're not using it, so you might want to consider swapping that for Ritual Sword Talisman or Crusade Insignia, as I mentioned. And also the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman is not bad either. You do go through a lot of stamina. Flame Spit consumes a ton, and you want it to come back quickly. If you find you're using Flame Spit, you know, evenly with Magma Shower and boss fights, you might want to consider swapping that. So stats-wise, at level 171, I have 55 Vigor, 35 Mind, 35 Endurance, 55 Strength, 20 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 25 Faith, 9 Arcane. You don't need any Intelligence or Arcane for this build. Vigor's at 55 because you will trade damage in boss fights, particularly when you're trying to get off a Flame Spit shot sometimes when you're at a questionable distance, and also you will trade damage sometimes when you're spamming Magma Shower just so you can keep spinning. Eventually you want to take that up to 60, but you won't go higher than that. Mind is at 35 because Flame Spit is expensive at 28 FP, and Magma Shower, if you hit L2 twice or the weapon skill button twice, it will use 24 FP, which is also a lot. So you go through a lot of FP with this build, and you don't really want to have to stop to Flask in a boss fight if possible. Endurance is at 35 to give us more stamina because, as I mentioned, Flame Spit goes through a lot, so does Magma Shower when you're spamming it. And this also gives us more equip load so we can use heavier armor to trade damage and not die. Strength is at 55. I found this to be kind of the sweet spot for strength. It starts to drop off a bit at this point. So probably from here on, you'll either increase Faith or Dexterity, depending. If you're going for maximum melee damage, you'll probably increase Dexterity. But if you're going for more of like a hybrid spellcasting build, you might want to go the Faith route for the Clawmark Seal. And Faith will also increase the fire damage of Magma Shower, so it's probably better to go Faith in general. And for the Flask of Wonders Physique, as I mentioned, we have Flame Shrouding Cracked here and Oil Soaked here. We never change these. This really helps to boost our damage. And when it comes to Great Runes for this build, I think Radawn's is a solid choice. Getting FP, Health, and Stamina are all great for this build. Godric's is also not bad. You are using 6 of the 8 stats, so either of those are good options. So this wraps up my Magma Spitter build. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Honestly, this build is probably one of the most fun builds I have played in a very long time. It might not be the deadliest build ever, even though I think it's fantastic and it absolutely works well. It's just really fun to play. I don't know what it is about Flames, but it's a really fun weapon skill to use, and Magma Shower is a really fun one to use as well. So just absolutely fun to play. As always, if you have further tips for people about this build, maybe things that I didn't mention in this video, or if you have questions about it, leave them in the comments, and I will try and reply to them as soon as I can.